February 8th, 1997. A crystal clear day in east central Idaho. Temperature -10. We have planned today an historical and geographical tour of the upper reaches of Lemhi Valley, Idaho. And we'll start with the ghost town of Gilmore, which was founded in 1902 by Edgar Ross and his brothers, mining men from western Pennsylvania. There were three principal holdings in the area: the Pittsburgh, Idaho mine, the Alley mine, and the latest out mine, yielding approximately $2 million of lead silver over its lifetime until the mine closed in the late 1920s, at about which point the town also died. The town was inextricably tied to the fortunes of the mining. But never mind reality, listen to the irrational exuberance of the promoters of the era. Speaking of Salmon, Idaho, which is just down the road a piece. Salmon is to become the only great city and great railroad center of this great Northwest. It will be the chief supplying center and distributing point between the Pacific and the Missouri River, the grand emporium and convention center of Idaho, where North and South will shake hands and where East and West will change cars if they want to go anywhere. It will be the biggest hotel city in the West, and by reason of its abundant water power, will vie with all competitors as a manufacturing center. Such things dreams are made of. By 1910, Lemhi County promoters expected that fully 10 railroad lines would make their way into the county. But only one made it: the Gilmore in Pittsburgh. Fueled by the success of Edgar Ross's mines at Gilmore, crews began laying track from Armstead, Montana to the Lemhi Valley in the winter of 1909 and 1910. Before the railroad came to Gilmore, Edgar Ross had to ship his lead-silver ore in a very cumbersome fashion overland by way of traction engine to Dubois, Idaho, and the nearest railhead some 80 miles away. But with the coming of the Gilmore and Pittsburgh road, handling the ore was greatly facilitated. As you look at the trace of the G&P roadbed winding itself up to Gilmore, it was called the implausible G&P. Capitalized at $2 million, the road never made any money. This short line was abandoned in 1939. The road was torn up and sold for scrap. Some say it was sold to the Japanese, who we were ready to fight in World War II, and others say it was sold for scrap to shoot bullets at the Japanese. The Gilmore in Pittsburgh was constructed during the last great era of transcontinental railroad building in the United States. Some thought the road, which ended in Salmon, could be continued on a water grade through the Salmon River Canyon, that is the river of no return, to the west coast, making for another transcontinental route. As you look at the grades and the many cuts and fills, again, the reason for calling this an implausible road. The road was constructed with capital funds raised in western Pennsylvania, hence the name Pittsburgh in all of this. Soon after the road was built in 1910, it became readily apparent to investors the folly of trying to extend the road. The investors were promised revenues of $300,000 a year or more by promoters in the Lemhi Valley. And in its best year, revenues reached only half that promised amount. Still, this road was a marvel of engineering ingenuity that speaks of a bygone era. And for that reason, it is worth our interest. To understand the Gilmore and Pittsburgh Railroad a little bit better, a geography lesson is helpful at this point. Starting out from the Oregon Short Line, or the Union Pacific tracks, which went from Salt Lake City, Utah to Butte, Montana. Armstead, Montana, located here on the OSL and now underwater at Clark Canyon Dam, was the origination point of the Gilmore and Pittsburgh, which then proceeded up Horse Prairie Valley and gained the summit of the Continental Divide at 7,600-foot Bannock Pass, came down Railroad Canyon into Lemhi Valley to Leadore, Idaho, and at that point branched, the North Branch proceeding down Lemhi Valley to Salmon, the other branch from Leadore proceeding south and up to the headwaters of the Lemhi Valley to the mines of Gilmore. So then, for the remainder of the day, let's explore the Idaho side of this operation, as the railroad came out what was Junction Road Canyon after 1910 became known as Railroad Canyon, coming out onto the flat, bypassing the town of Junction. The railroad created a new town named Leadore. That became the new junction of the line. Following the Lemhi Valley with the Beaverhead section of the Bitterroot Mountains, the Continental Divide, providing one margin, and to the west, Idaho's longest mountain chain, the 100-mile-long Lemhi Range. Does indeed provide an awesome setting for this railroad. Let's examine the setting a little bit more. The Beaverhead Mountains were named in 1913 by U.S. geologist Joseph Umpleby, and they're really part of the Bitterroot Range, which is probably one of the very longest subranges in the whole Rocky Mountain complex. This section of the Bitterroots is the Continental Divide, separating the waters of the Atlantic and Pacific, and also is the state line of Idaho and Montana. So then, we start at 18 Mile Peak, one of the very highest points in the Bitterroots at over 11,000 feet, and we follow the crest north to Cottonwood Peak, Mount Carpenter at 10,680 is named for General Land Office Surveyor H.B. Carpenter, who in fact mile-marked much of this section of the Continental Divide during the years 1904 to 1906. In 1950, Surveyor Walter R. Helm of the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey established a triangulation station on top of 10,700-foot Monida Baldy, and also used that sharp-pointed summit, which he called Mountain Peak Conical Top, as a basis for his triangulation, which of course is the skeleton work needed in constructing maps. Bull Mountain, another 10,000-foot summit. And at the base of Bull Mountain was the 1870s ranch of the Hawley brothers, one of the first pioneering families in the Lemhi Valley. The low point would be Hawley Creek. Pass Mountain was occupied by U.S. geological topographical engineer Thomas Moore Bannon in 1913 when he did his extensive triangulation work in the states of Idaho and Montana. As we showed you before, Railroad Canyon is a historic and prehistoric transportation link between Idaho and Montana, and used by the Lemhi Shoshone to get to the buffalo grounds of Montana. The flat 9,200-foot penoplaned surface that we look at is called Grizzly Hill, and that'll be a destination for us a little bit later today. Proceeding north, East and West Peak, also occupied by Bannon in 1913, and to the left, Goat Mountain, occupied by Walter Helm in 1950. Ramsey Mountain, named in honor of the people that ran sheep in the area, the Urians being most notable. The 1940 salvage operation on the roadbed was rather complete. I doubt in the whole 118 miles of the line you could find a remaining spike today. The climax flora of Lemhi Valley is the sagebrush, here reclaiming railroad bed. Why the railroad engineers bypassed the town of Junction is anybody's guess. You'd have to ask the engineers themselves why. Today nothing remains of Junction, just a sagebrush flat. At this point we ought to thank Rex Myers, professor at Western Montana College in Dillon, as the source for much of the information today. His work can be found in Colorado Rail Annual number 15, the Idaho-Montana issue. Shortly we'll head over into Railroad Canyon as we follow the tracks to the top of the continent. This old photo of teamster Jess Surratt at Junction shows that it must have been a lively place way back when. We'll come back and visit Leadore at the end of the day, but suffice to say the railroad chose to construct this town where Texas Creek and 18 Mile Creek form. The Lemhi River, which the early day trappers called the South Fork of the Salmon River. As we head into Railroad Canyon, we're going to need to build up a head of steam. The caption is "Outward Bound from Leadore." Aren't those old Baldwin engines just marvelous? The G&P used old second-hand engines from the Pennsy Railroad. My grandfather, Wenzel Ellick, who emigrated to the United States at the turn of the century from Austria-Hungary, worked in the Bethlehem Steel Mill in Steelton, Pennsylvania, that made the steel for these engines. "'Tis a sad day without the railroad in Lemhi Valley." The little engine that could. make it up to the top of the Bannock Pass. Coming out of Leadore, the first station to be reached was Crook, named for Alexander Cruikshank, who had a ranch here. Alexander Cruikshank was a scout for General O.O. Howard during the Nez Perce War of 1877. When T.M. Bannon of the Geological Survey came through here in 1913, Cruikshank was an old-timer. Bannon's field notes indicate being able to see his signal on 10,100-foot Horse Prairie Peak the whole length of Cruikshank Canyon. Today, Bannon's signal doesn't exist on top of that. Carpenter's mile mark post is still intact, however, on Horse Prairie Peak. The challenge of the railroad to surmount the Bannock Pass goes something like this. Heading from Crook Station, where we've tanked up with water, we head up canyon until we encounter a steep switchback. We pull in, we back out. We proceed up the mountain backwards. The top steepest stretch is surmounted by way of a tunnel under the Continental Divide, still going backwards, now downhill into Montana. When we come to our next switchback, we right ourselves, going forward, proceeding down into Horse Prairie, towards Brenner Station and Armstead. Bannock Pass at almost 7,600 feet provides a steep grade for the railroad on either side. The railroad had to use rotaries to keep the pass open in winter. That's an awesome wind-blown drift there. Must have been a Herculean task to keep this road open in the wintertime. But today, for us to gain the pass, we're a little bit more fortunate. While there are no 20-foot drifts, there's still enough to ski on. And speaking of skiing, that sounds like a pretty good idea. What do you say, let's get those boards out? Talk to you in a bit. Okay, and starting out from the pass, we have one of those distinctive milepost markers set by Carpenter. This happens to be milepost 528. The M is for Montana, I for Idaho, AP, Atlantic Pacific. The Salmon and Beaverhead National Forests, in which we'll be skiing today, were created in 1906, and this massive set-aside of public land was orchestrated by President Teddy Roosevelt and Chief Forester Gifford Pinchot. Technically, we're in Montana now. We'll be skiing along the snow machine tracks into the grove of trees and pretty much following the Continental Divide for several miles. The country in this section of the Bitterroot Range is interesting because it's transitional. We're near the margin of the Basin and Range province, where it meets the province of the Northern Rockies. Right here, the forest is Douglas fir and lodgepole. The The wide open sagebrush slopes are more reminiscent of the dry basin and range, while the dense stands of timber would remind one more of the wetter northern Rockies. We've been cutting some up trail here. As we look to Bannock Pass, that was the escape route used by the Nez Perce in 1877 as they were fleeing the U.S. cavalry. Under Looking Glass, Whitebird, and Chief Joseph, the band of Nez Perce were hoping to unite and rally the Shoshone Indians to their cause, but didn't have any luck in that endeavor. So they fled south and east to next engage the cavalry at the Battle of Camas Meadows in Idaho. Right now we're looking to Horse Prairie, one of the few names bestowed on a geographical feature by Captain Meriwether Lewis and William Clark when they came through in their voyage of discovery in 1805. Regrettably, most of the Lewis and Clark names have been lost off the face of the modern map. One of the beacons of southwestern Montana is Polaris, or Old Baldy, a T.M. Bannon triangulation station, occupied 1912. Bannon is my unabashed hero. He lived from 1870 to 1917, and from 1889 until his death worked as a topographer for the U.S. Geological Survey, and was responsible for creating over 50 topographical maps published by the Geological Survey. The fence denotes the state line. We've been making our tracks in Montana, and now we need to get our butts on the other side of the fence back to Idaho to continue our route. The 8,500-foot Bannon triangulation station that we're looking at across Horse Prairie is named JCB in honor of John Christopher Brenner, who settled in Horse Prairie in 1883 and probably provided Bannon with stock and forage when he was in this section. Brenner settled over in there and took over a ranch owned by Montague, who was killed in 1877 by the Nez Perce as they were roaming through that area. Brenner's great-granddaughter runs the fourth generation ranch at the present time. We are on Grizzly Hill in the Junction Mining District, where lead silver was mined at the turn of the century. And looking across miles and miles of untracked snow to the Lemhi Range in Idaho, we see Finger, Bell Mountain on the right, and Thumb, Diamond Peak on the left, in the Lemhi Range, so named by T.M. Bannon when he made his first ascents of those peaks in 1913. Descending from Grizzly Hill, our eyes are always open for those nice, lovely downhill shots. Like these in deep powder. It's nice. Yeah. All totaled, the Idaho-Montana state line is 730 some miles long. Starting from the Canadian boundary, there is a straight stretch of 71 miles, which was first surveyed by D.L. Rayburn of the U.S. Geological Survey in 1898 and 1899. Once attaining the crest of the Bitterroot Mountains, the boundary line snakes its way south and east, where it picks up the Continental Divide at Lost Trail Pass. Then it continues along the crest of the range, exactly where we are now, continuing south. It meets Yellowstone Park for an awfully long stretch. That's a pretty famous area over there in the middle distance. Trail Creek is the route Lewis and Clark took to gain the crest of the Continental Divide when they crossed here in 1805. Just beyond it, Bloody Dick Creek was the escape route used by the Nez Perce as they retreated from the Battle of the Big Hole. Bloody Dick Peak, abandoned survey station, named for a trapper in these parts, named Bloody Dick. Research seems to indicate that Bloody Dick is none other than Idaho's most known Beaver Dick Lee, Richard Lee, guide to the Hayden Survey of the 1870s, for whom Lee Lake and the Teton Range is named. It's a small world. Bloody Dick. Oh yeah, snow has many different names, and the name of this stuff is champagne. Let's go back up and do that one again. And again. And again. Knock it off, will you, Bogger? It's no fair for one person to get all the fun. But it's just like this, Doc. I can't help myself. Hey, don't mind him. He's nuts. Yeah, 3 times a nut. Don't believe what that guy says. Skied out? Not hardly, but we have promises to keep. Couldn't resist it, huh? Just one last shot. All right, back to the pass. Time to get back on task. On the Idaho side of the pass, I think you can see the G&P grade there, how it would come up to its switchback, and the train would nudge into the switchback and then ascend the rest of the route backwards. Now that is a steep railroad grade. So now you can understand why helper engines were needed to surmount the pass. The railroad from Leadore, Idaho, this is Rick Bogger. Thank you for coming along today. And there is no finer way to end the day than to absorb an alpenglow on the Idaho side of the Continental Divide.